Hello there, and welcome back to this Java development course. So, last time we went over the if statement in Java, and you had some homework to do. Your job was to get an integer a from the console and print whether a was positive, negative, or equal to 0. That's essentially what you should have done. So here I have my class if in Java homework, my main method, scanner, system.in as where we're going to get it from, so that's the console. Then I get the next integer from scanner, so it's going to be an integer a. If a is more than 0, a is positive. If a is less than 0, then we print a is negative. And if a is equal to 0, then we print a is equal to 0. So, like this, we could use if statements, and if statements are actually pretty useful. So now let's go ahead and actually run this. Whoops, apparently it's not running the right thing. That is odd. Most likely it's just not running the right. That's weird. Let me actually take a look at exactly what's happening, and I'll see you in a second, I guess. There you go, I solved it. I don't really know exactly what's happening. I just restarted Eclipse. Sometimes you get those kind of bugs where it can't really find something. Just try sometimes restarting Eclipse, and a lot of times that solves the problem. If not, then that maybe you have a more specific problem that you need to just look up. But in my case, I just had to restart Eclipse. Okay, so let's go and run this. Whoops. All right, there we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's just say 1. A is positive, and if we do -1, a is negative, and if we do 0, a is equal to 0. So there we go. So now, together, we were able to create an application which will tell us whether a number that we enter is positive or negative. All right, so there we go. So that's how we use if statements, and they're actually pretty useful if, again, I know I'm saying this for like the millionth time or so, but if statements are very useful, and they are one of the basis, one of the very fundamental concepts of programming, so it's important to understand them. That said, this code does seem a little bit redundant. So here what we're doing is we're checking the if statement 3 times. So we're saying if a is more than 0, then we're going to print a is positive. So let's just, for the case of example, let's just say that we entered 1. So a is more than 0, and so it printed a is positive. So what does this mean? Well, that means that a cannot be less than 0, and it cannot be equal to 0, since it's more than 0, right? But since what we are doing here is we're doing if a is more than 0, we're then doing if a is less than 0. And so in result, we're still going to be checking it. Even though a is more than 0, and we know that, it's still going to check if a is less than 0, and then it's also going to check if a is equal to 0. And so in result, this just wastes time. So the program has to check, oh look, a is more than 0, we'll print a is positive. Then it checks, oh look, a is less than 0, it prints a isn't less than 0. It's not, it's more than 0, and so it doesn't do anything. And then it checks, oh look, a is not equal to 0 either, so I'll skip this as well. And it spends time checking these two. So it spends time, making sure that, executing, or at least trying to execute these if statements. So in result, what we can actually do is we have something called the else if statement. So let's go and actually take a look at that now. We're going to go ahead and do new class else if in Java. Actually, let's just do else if. Yeah, public static void main. We're actually, first of all, we're going to take a look at just the else statement without the if, but for now, it's just going to be, okay. So, int a equals, let's actually create the scanner. Let's do the same exact thing. So, scanner sc equals new scanner. And remember, we have to assign where we're going to get our scanner value from. In this case, we're going to get it from console or system.in. There we go, import scanner. And now we're going to do int a equals sc.nextInt. Okay, so what is our objective? Well, our objective is to not check whether or not a is less than 0 or equal to 0 if a is more than 0. That's actually what we're going to do. And so, to do that, we're just going to do if a is more than 0, we're going to print a is positive, right? And then we're going to have if a is less than 0, we're going to do system.out.println a is negative. There we go. Okay, so now we have these two if statements. But again, it's going to check both of them. So even if a is more than 0, it's still going to go ahead and check if a is less than 0, even though it obviously isn't, since it's more than 0. Well, for that, we actually have this other statement, else. And we don't actually need this anymore. Okay, so what does the else statement do? So the else statement essentially just makes sure that if this returns false, so a is more than 0, it'll automatically execute this else statement. So let's take a look at this. There we go. So we can now do 1, and it'll print a is positive. And if we redo it, we can now do -1, and it'll print a is negative. So what is happening here? Well, when we insert -1, it goes ahead and does if a is more than 0. In this case, a is -1. So is -1 more than 0? It's not. So this is going to be equal to false. There we go. So that will be equal to false. And then we will, so then, since it is false, it'll just execute this else statement. So if this is false, this will automatically get executed. Okay? Okay. Let's actually take a look at a little bit of another example. Perhaps this will be a little bit easier to understand. Let's comment this out. Okay, so if false, else. So in this example, this else statement will always get executed, no matter what. There we go. As you can see, else statement is executing. Let's actually go to actually do right here. If statement is executing as well. There we go. So let's go ahead and run this right now. Else if. Let's just insert some value. And as you can see, else statement is executing. So since this is false, this will automatically run, this else statement. So how else could we possibly use this? Well, we can do it like this. Let's go ahead and remove this. We can do if a is more than 0 or a is less than 0, a is not 0. Or actually, what we actually do, just to make the code a little bit better to read, if a is not equal to 0, a is not 0. Else a is 0. There we go. So now let's run this. 5, a is not 0, 0, a is 0. All right, so what's happening? So when we insert 0 into here, we check, is a not equal to 0? That will return false, since a is equal to 0. So it'll return false, and so it won't execute this, anything in these square brackets. Then we check else. We don't check anything, we just say else. So if this is false, then we print, actually no, we just execute whatever is between these brackets. So in this case, we print a is 0. And that's why we get this a is 0 here. So that is how we use the else statement in Java. Now, what if we still want to check something? So in this case, if a is not equal to 0, let's say that we want to check if a is not equal to 1 as well. So a is not 0. So if a is not equal to 0, a is not 0. But how do we check if a is not 1? So we want to do it so that if we insert 0, we'll print a is 0. If we insert 1, it'll print a is 1. and if we insert anything else, it'll just say a is not 0. So how do we check that? Well, to do that, we have something called the else statement. So how do we do this? First of all, let's go ahead and check if a is equal to 0. We're going to restructure our code a little bit. So a is 0, okay? Then we're going to do else if a is equal to 1. And for some reason it put it into here. There we go. A is equal to 1. System.out.println. A is 1. Else a is not 0 or 1. All right, there we go. Okay, so what will happen here? So first it'll check if a is equal to 0. If it is equal to 0, then it'll just stop executing this entire thing and jump right here to line 19 and start executing from there. But if it isn't equal to 0, it'll check this else if. So it'll do is a equal to 1? In this case, well, no, I mean not in this case. Let's just say that right now our number is 2. So in this case, it'll return false. And then in result, it'll just jump to this else statement and execute system.println a is not 0 or 1. So there we go. And we can have as many else if statements as we want. So we can do else if a is not equal to 1. Not 2 as well. So if a is equal to 2. There we go. And for some reason, it always puts it right here. So if a is equal to 2, system.out.println a is equal to 2. There we go. So a is not equal to 0, 1, or 2 now as well. Okay, so there we go. All right, so this application, it's checking if a is equal to 0, it'll print 0. If a is equal to 1, it'll print 1. And if a is equal to 2, it'll print 2. If a is equal to neither of those, it'll print a is not 0 or 1 or 2. Okay, so the important thing to understand here with else and else if statements is that we use them in order to not check something that we already know is false. So let's just say that a is equal to 0. What's the point of checking a is equal to 1, a is equal to 2, when we already know that it's equal to 0? There is no point. So in result, we have the else if statement, which will only execute if this is false. So if this is true, then it'll just ignore all of these, and it'll just jump right on to the rest of the code, starting from line 21. Understandable? Okay. Okay, so another important thing to note, that I also went over, is that we can have unlimited else if statements. So if we wanted, we could have 100 or 1,000 of them. So however many we want. But we can only have one else statement. And we don't necessarily require an else statement to be had. So we can just remove it altogether if we don't want it. Okay? And also, one last thing, you can't remove the if statement though. So you can remove the else statement, but you can't just do else if, it'll throw you an error. Okay. One last thing we need to go over with if statements is inner if statement. So we have, or actually no, nested if statement. So if we can do if a is equal to 0, we can then do if a is equal to 1, if a is equal to 2, if a is equal to 2. So technically this will also sort of solve it. Let me go ahead and do it right now. System.out.println a is equal to 0. But in this case as well, we are in fact checking, so a is equal to 0. What's the point of checking a is equal to 1? So this is just to demonstrate that we can't have if statements inside if statements. So there's no rule that we can only have if statements on plain method text. So we can have it inside if statements as well. That is no problem. Okay, so that is essentially how we work with if statements as well as else if statements. Now, let's assign you some homework. All right, so homework today will be very simple. all it's going to be is you're going to take in an integer from the console. This is going to be a age of a person. And so you're going to print whether the person is able to vote or is not able to vote. So if it's over 18, then or equal to 18, then he is able to vote. If it's less than 18, then he or she is not able to vote. So yeah, so very simple homework. Maximum, like I think this is going to take like 10 lines of code or so. So yeah, pretty simple. Use if statements, of course. If else statements, of course. So don't just put two if statements. That would be kind of, ignoring the whole thing we did today. So yeah. Anyway, I wish you look at the homework. It's pretty simple, so I think you'll get it, and I'll see you next time. Till soon.